You're listening to Let's Get Real, the cooking show about finding, preparing, and eating food with me, Erica Wides, on the Heritage Radio Network. So here's a question that I like to ask myself, and also I like to ask you, my listeners, as often as I possibly can. And I bet you can probably guess what this question is because I ask it of you quite often. You know me pretty well by now. So you tell me, what is the question? Well, the question, my friends, of course, is what kind of person are you? Or what kind of person do you want to be? Well, you already listen to this show and to Heritage Radio, so you're probably okay. I'm sure you're not a foodiness eater, or at least you try not to be one. Sometimes you can't help it, though, like when you're in the airport or on the road or, visiting your relatives in the Midwest. But what about when you're in the supermarket? Particularly when you're walking down the frozen food aisles. Now, the common thought, with supermarkets is like, oh, shop the perimeter. That's what we always say, shop the perimeter. But actually, if you go down some of the aisles, there's real food there also. Now, in the frozen food aisles, though, or frozen food aisle, I have to use the plural for aisles because now there are multiple frozen food aisles now. Not just one, like it used to be, but now there's one just for frozen desserts and frozen sweets and frozen snacks, which is gigantic and filled with hundreds and hundreds of variations on ice cream and popsicles and frozen smoothies and diet desserts and so many more than I ever even thought existed until I looked last weekend in the big suburban supermarket. I went on a research mission. And then there's the one that has like the regular old frozen stuff, like the real food, like vegetables and fish fillets, actual food. And then there's the frozen foodiness aisle. Now that is the brave new world. That is a whole frozen food rabbit hole that I never really knew existed until recently. I mean, I grew up eating frozen vegetables. We all did, right? And, frozen meat and frozen fish and frozen orange juice concentrate, all that stuff. Maybe a TV dinner or a frozen pizza or a lean cuisine once we got into the 80s. But that frozen foodiness aisle that I investigated this weekend just blew me away. And I will get back to that shortly. Now, back in my childhood, the 70s and 80s, of course, supermarket produce was very limited. This was in the pre-arugula Enlightenment years. And there weren't very many choices, and none of it was very fresh, and it was all kind of pre-wrapped in styrofoam trays, and it was all kind of grim. And I remember going to the store back then with my mom, and the selection was pretty small. Today, supermarkets carry an enormous array of produce in comparison to a few decades ago, and that's great. But back then, they didn't. So in our house, we always had this stockpile of frozen vegetables. We had packages in our freezer of green beans and peas and broccoli, but always green beans. It always came back to green beans. I mean, we always had a garden in the summer, and we pickled and we preserved, and actually we were doing all that Brooklyn hipster stuff that everybody's doing now, but this was back in 1978, so who's the thought leader? Yet again, TEDx, Berkeley. Did I mention that? But anyway, we all ate frozen vegetables. We ate them all winter, and I had always doubted whether I was actually getting much nutrition out of them, but it turns out, in many cases, frozen vegetables retain more nutrition than fresh, which is something, as the right kind of person, you should probably already know by now. But anyway, this is especially true for supermarket vegetables because they've been in transit for over a week when they make it to the store, and then they sit out on a shelf and just kind of die until some produce manager takes pity on them, puts them on the discount produce shelf, and then you know who comes along and buys them, as I discussed last week. So I guess I'm not really getting a bargain after all when I buy my discount shelf stuff because it's old by the time I get it. Oh well. Now, this is a conflict that, I naturally have to deal with all the time because being, thrifty and Jewish and all that, but also the host of a cooking show about food and real food, I have to kind of resolve that conflict. And that's actually a good chapter to put into my memoir. So, Chris, let's get on that, okay? Anyway, back then we ate a lot of frozen vegetables, and they were inevitably soggy and overcooked because in order to freeze a vegetable properly, it has to be blanched first. Now, blanching is just a quick dunking in boiling water. But frozen vegetables are blanched first because that deactivates enzymes in the vegetables that will cause decay even though they're frozen. And it keeps the green color brighter and it keeps them fresher looking, and it actually preserves their flavor better than if you froze them from their raw state. But that means that a frozen vegetable is already cooked when you buy it and when it's frozen. And the package instructions back then used to say things like boil for 10 to 15 minutes. So we would eat these piles of wet, soggy French-cut green beans and crinkle-cut sliced carrots and frozen peas and graying broccoli spears. And I'm feeling like 70s malaise coming on me just thinking about it. I feel like Jimmy Carter just walked in the room. And my mom was trying to do the right thing back then, feeding us vegetables. All winter, she'd pull a different box out of the freezer each night. And we also always had our salad with it too, but they weren't much back then either because they were usually just iceberg lettuce, because this is the era where the word salad meant iceberg lettuce and maybe a tomato and a boiled egg covered in Thousand Island dressing, or at least that's what my co-producer Chris says he and his mother ate a lot in the 70s. But what we were eating was iceberg lettuce with shredded carrots and raw red cabbage and celery with bottle dressing. Now, in the summer, it was different because I lived on Long Island and it was still full of farms back then, not malls. And so in season, we would get local corn and peaches and asparagus and tomatoes and strawberries, and we would do all our canning and pickling and jamming and all of that. But in the winter, it was frozen. And the technique for freezing vegetables hasn't really changed since then, except for some stuff that's now being frozen cryogenically in liquid nitrogen, like Walt Disney's head or Chris's face, thanks to his regular trips to his dermatologist. And since the vegetables retain much more nutrition than most fresh stuff, you really only need to thaw it out under hot water or put it in the microwave or steam it briefly to bring it back to life. And like I said, most supermarket veg sits out on the shelf for a week. It loses its nutritional value. But frozen produce is picked and frozen almost immediately. So it's actually often a better choice. Okay, now, enough of that. Back to the question, which, as you recall, was, what kind of a person are you? Well, I'm a practical and realistic person. And I know that I should always eat what's local and seasonal and fresh and organic. But I live in the northeastern U.S., and unless I want to eat turnips and potatoes all winter, I have to make some practical choices. So I have no problem with frozen vegetables or fruit. I buy them. I bought a giant bag of frozen organic green beans a year ago at Costco, and I just finished eating them because I was going to be damned if I would lose those beans or throw them out. And I'd rather eat a frozen Maine blueberry in the winter than one flown in from Chile. The carbon footprint on the frozen stuff probably isn't so great, having to transport it and keep something frozen indefinitely. It uses an awful lot of energy, but think about the waste factor with fresh stuff. It has to be picked and processed too, and then transported in a refrigerated truck, where after a few days it gets tossed away, either by the store or the consumer, and contributes to landfill. Whereas frozen stays quietly tucked away until you're ready to freeze, until you're ready to cook it, or until the grid fails and we have no more freezers and we have to just eat it like that. Until then, I'm okay with certain frozen foods, as in food that's frozen. Take a food and freeze it, like broccoli or blueberries or wild salmon from Alaska or real ice cream. The point is that you can't win. It's all fucked up, and any choice you make with food pretty much is a bad one. And even if you grow your own vegetables, you had to buy those seeds, which were all transported on big trucks, and use all the water to grow them, and then the water's probably all fracked up anyway. And meanwhile, they've probably never even heard of water in Afghanistan. So you either shut down altogether and become orthorexic and eat nothing but popcorn, like me, or you let yourself be guided using the only guiding principle that really counts. What kind of person do you want to be? It boils down to this. Frozen real food can be just as real non-frozen food. So you can buy frozen food and still be the right kind of people as long as you don't linger in that aisle for too long. So, of course, what we're getting to is the difference between frozen food and frozen foodiness. Of course, you know what kind of girl I am. I'm a frozen food kind of girl, but I'm certainly not a frozen foodiness kind of girl. The kind you see waddling down the frozen food aisle with all of her frozen diet dinners and frozen diet desserts and frozen kid food, which I'll get to shortly. And I know you're not that kind of person either. So you just need to know the difference between frozen food and frozen foodiness. You want to know what I think of as frozen foodiness? Not necessarily even things like TV dinners or ice cream sandwiches or fish sticks. although those are all way more processed than the food that we should be eating. Those are more like the quaint, charming, frozen foodiness of yore. So innocuous and old school and seemingly harmless. Those are only like second or third degree foodiness, not like sixth. No, I'm talking about things like frozen pre-cooked scrambled eggs, or frozen pre-made pancakes, or frozen salad fixings that you just add to lettuce, or frozen diet muffin tops, or frozen strawberry strudel flavored Eggo wafflers. Yeah, not frozen Eggo waffles, which I happily ate many mornings in my youth, but a redesigned elongated waffle meant to be handheld, because expecting a kid to sit down and use a fork apparently is now tantamount to child abuse, given especially that using a fork to eat would interrupt the video gaming. And the handheld waffler has strawberry strudel flavor mixed in so that no syrup is needed. I don't want any of my discerning, enlightened listeners to think I'm just rushing to judgment. No, not at all. I'm taking my time to judge this one. So let's dissect this more closely. First of all, just because I ate Eggo waffles growing up doesn't mean they're okay. If I had kids, they would never be eating them. I'd never feed my kids a wad of white flour and sugar for breakfast anyway. So the idea of a frozen toaster waffle is bad enough. But then taking the waffle concept and distorting it to make it handheld, which just exacerbates our collective laziness and infantilization so that you now don't need to even sit at a table with a plate or a fork, but you can eat it with your little paw in the minivan while you play video games on your device held right up to your eyes. It's really too much. But then you take that handheld waffler and you flavor it, not simply strawberry, which would be bad enough too, since it's not being flavored with real strawberries, let alone seasonal or organic strawberries. Ha ha! As if. No, it's not even strawberry flavored. It's strawberry strudel flavored. Because most minivan riding suburban chubster kids, let's call them the children of the potatoes, must have spent some time in the great European pastry capitals of Vienna or Budapest and have tasted the finest examples of true Middle European pastry in all its delicate, hand-pulled, perfect fruit-filled glory. And while they were there, sitting on the Ringstrasse in Vienna and having afternoon coffee and strudel at Demel and pondering the great arts of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Habsburgs, they thought, if only there was a way to bring this magnificent creation back home to Alabama. And those same kids must have gotten back home to Birmingham and said, we must have strawberry strudel flavored waffles for breakfast. Nothing else will do. And so they did. But if you look closely at the picture on the waffler's box, where it says, with strawberry strudel flavor, you'll notice that it's not actually strudel that's illustrated, but suspiciously much more like a strawberry Pop-Tart. Are the children of America being duped? Are they expecting strudel flavor but getting Pop-Tart flavor? I see a huge class action lawsuit coming together here, people. Call me. We're going to get my lawyer, Dominic, right on it. So it's a foodiness product flavored like another foodiness product. A frozen toaster pastry flavored frozen toaster pastry. That's the frozen foodiness of today. And it makes my little old frozen waffle out of the toaster oven seem like whole grain organic local oats raised by your lesbian neighbors next door in Bushwick in comparison. At least I had to use a knife and fork to eat them back then, and they only had probably 1/1000th of the flavoring added. But back then we also had to actually sit in front of the TV to play a video game, so life was much simpler. Now, another great frozen foodiness item that I came upon this weekend as I prowled the frozen aisles of the major supermarkets of Westchester County was a product called Vitatops. Now, Vitatops are frozen diet 100-calorie muffin tops. So it's a frozen part of a muffin, whittled down to 100 calories and pumped up full of fiber. Now, as we all know, muffins are really just a cake wolf in muffin sheep's clothing. I mean, come on. We all know the only difference between a muffin and a cupcake is the pink icing flour on top of the cupcake. But muffins, of course, have a health halo because they get pumped up full of bran and nuts and stuff that technically is good for you, but not if the substrate that the bran and the nuts are sitting in is just white flour and sugar and vegetable shortening. And most muffins are over 500 calories and have more sugar than a bowl of the Captain. So I suppose these diet muffin tops are for people who just have no self-control and simply cannot resist the muffin, but really, really want the tops, yet ironically don't want a muffin top. I mean, even the homeless want the tops. They don't want the stumps, right? You have to be a Seinfeld fan to get that line. So tweet me if you did, and lucky for you, you can now buy a box of 100-calorie frozen muffin tops only. If you tweet me about the Seinfeld line, I will send you a coupon for a box of 100-calorie frozen muffin tops. You can use it or not. So you can eat that 100-calorie frozen muffin top for breakfast, then have a major blood sugar crash and go through the drive-thru on your mobility scooter and eat 17 quarter-pounders for lunch. But it's okay because your breakfast was only 100 calories. We're going to take a short break here. When we come back, more about frozen foodiness. We'll be right back.
You're listening to AM by Shadowbox on the Heritage Radio Network.org. Keep it locked for more Let's Get Real.
This is Chris Howell from Cane Vineyard and Winery, calling in from Spring Mountain above the Napa Valley. Thank you for listening to this show. In our industrial world of highly processed food and wine, we support the values of Heritage Radio Network. All of us at Cane encourage you to seek out individuality and beauty in everything you eat and drink. To learn more about us, go to cane5.com.
Welcome back to Let's Get Real, the cooking show about finding, preparing, and eating food on the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Erica Wides, your host. Now, I'm going to issue a challenge to my listeners. If you catch a normal weight person, or even a person who simply weighs less than, say, 300 pounds, eating a 100-calorie frozen diet Vita muffin top, and tweet a picture of them to me, you'll win a lifetime supply of whole grain rice-a-roni enhanced with vitamin E, grown right out of my own rooftop rice-a-roni garden here in Brooklyn, which apparently now has been branded the coolest city on earth, which of course automatically makes me want to move to Baltimore. So in this weekend's research expedition that I took in the suburbs of New York, I also found a frozen, pre-made Smart Ones brand cheese omelet. Now, I've railed against the frozen pre-scrambled eggs before on this show, and against frozen breakfast sandwiches, too. And now here comes another one, a pre-made frozen cheese omelet that also comes with a side of potatoes and has 41 ingredients in it. I don't know any diner that will make a 41 ingredient omelet. They would charge you for all that. That would be like a $41 omelet. Now, if I made a cheese omelet with potatoes at home, here's what I would use. Eggs, cheese, oil, potatoes, salt, pepper. Okay, the cheese may have rennet in it, so we could count that. And I might throw in like an onion or a roasted red pepper or something, which would bring my tally up to 9. Yeah, I know. It's actual work to heat up a pan and beat a few eggs and grate some cheese. Well, boo-hoo. You have to work for your food just a little bit. Think of your great-grandma during the Depression. She'd be thrilled to have those eggs and cheese to cook for herself. Half the world right now would give anything to eat something that didn't come off a UN plane or wasn't salvaged from a 10-story tall garbage heap full of iPhone 4s and used Uggs. Now go make yourself a fucking omelet. Like I said earlier, there's food, there's frozen food, and there's frozen foodiness. What kind of person do you want to be? Someone who knows how to make an omelet and who can fit into pants smaller than a parachute, or who microwaves frozen, pre-scrambled, smart omelets and drives their mobility scooter down the frozen food aisles at Walmart. I think I need to start giving out awards to the most foodinest food of them all. I may start doing that every week. Award something or someone the foodiness Oscar, shaped like the golden uncrustable. The golden what, you say? You mean you rarefied Heritage Radio listener ears have never heard of the uncrustable? Well, hold on to your ironic leather suspenders, people. An Uncrustable is a magical little invention brought to you by our friends at Smucker's. You know, the nice jam company with the goofy name, the aw shucks heartland image of fruit farms and grandmas and jelly jars. Well, if you've been listening to Let's Get Real long enough, you know by now to never trust grandmas. Exhibit A. So Smucker's must have gotten a memo from those same strudel-loving kids when they got back from Europe and their moms that said this: Dear Smucker's, we kids and moms of America love our peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, as you must know all too well. The PB&J is the quintessential American sandwich. It's more American than apple pie, baseball, or the Wii. Only communists and Muslims from Hawaii wouldn't eat them. But we moms are so busy. We have Pinteresting and minivan driving and housewives watching, and we have to wax off all our body hair and also remember to DVR Dance Moms and to make sure we get the nanny her $3 an hour off the books. We are busy. And our precious little Lexi and Hampton have very discerning palates and will only eat 3 foods. And who are we to push them to do anything they don't want to do? We don't want our children to ever learn the word no. It's so negative, and only unhappy people say negative things, and Jesus never said no to anything after all. So anyway, Smuckers, Lexi and Hampton really love their PB&Js, but they really hate bread crusts. You know how hard and crunchy the crust on packaged white bread in a bag can be? And they've never developed their jaw strength or their adult teeth because they've only used sippy cups and eaten squeezy fruit from a pouch and yogurt from a tube. And they can't manage a knife and fork because I only give them food they can eat in the minivan since we are so busy. And, of course, they need their hands to play games on their iPads. So it's a lot of work to make them their PB&J sandwiches and cut off the crust every single time. And it means I have to actually walk around the supermarket finding the peanut butter and the jelly and the bread, which takes a lot of effort, especially in heels. So, Smuckers, can you please make a frozen, pre-made, crustless PB&J sandwich that we can keep stockpiled in our freezer and just pull out every time Lexi and Hampton need to be fed? And make it round so it's easier for their chubby little mitts to grab onto in the minivan. Thanks so much, Smuckers. Love ya. America. P.S. If you could put the instructions in Spanish so the nanny can read them, that would be great too. Thanks. That, my friends, is the Uncrustable, a frozen, pre-made peanut butter and jelly sandwich, crustless, in a package, suitable for feeding America's progeny. We are fucked. So, for this week's inaugural presentation of the Foodiness Awards, the Golden Uncrustable goes to the Uncrustable. Before you leave tonight, please admire the Golden Uncrustable and notice how I made a layer of sparkling purple amethyst to represent the jelly between the layers of golden bread and peanut butter. Classy, right? So Smuckers and all the other foodiness makers of America, that's it. You win. I give up. We have gone to hell, and it's over, and I quit. And by quit, of course, Chris and I are going to make a shitload of money off the first cooking show about the foodiness shit you make, and then I'll be able to afford to have all of my own food grown in my palatial backyard, and Chris will be able to afford to have his whole body cryogenically frozen like God meant 40-something gay men to do. Let me get real for a second and put it to you this way. There are billions of starving people around the world. And we use up our precious resources pandering to lazy, spoiled kids and their overindulgent parents with frozen, crustless sandwiches. And to point it out makes you an elitist. There, I said it. Let me tell you what else makes you an elitist. Watching Downton Abbey makes you an elitist. Not eating Uncrustables makes you not an idiot. So think about it. Who are you? And what kind of person do you want to be? The point of the show is that you can buy frozen food and still be the right kind of person. Just buy frozen organic blueberries or frozen wild salmon. Not frozen peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and frozen diet low-calorie muffin Vitatops. and get out of the frozen food aisle quickly and back to the produce aisle as soon as you can. And if you don't want to be a person who eats shit, then you're already in the right place. Just keep on listening to Let's Get Real, the cooking show about finding, preparing, and eating food here on heritageradionetwork.org with me, your host, Erica Wides. If you are a fan of the show, please follow me on Twitter at Let's Get Real Show, or you can find us on Facebook. You can also find all of our episodes ever produced on iTunes and on letsgetrealshow.com and on heritageradionetwork.org. And remember that May is membership month here at Heritage Radio. Even though May is almost over, there's still time. We live in a very quick world. Only takes a second. Go to heritageradionetwork.org, click on join, and become one of us. You don't want to be one of them, do you? That's all the time we have for tonight. Thanks to Joe in the control room. Thanks to Chris Nutter, my co-producer. We'll see you next week.